Hey guys, it's Tom coming to you today, following up from last time where we were discussing André Gorz and his critique of economic reason, in which he tries to bring forth how the emphasis upon the quantitative with respect to economic reason leads to certain grievous distortions because it places us at a distance from the concrete tasks which present themselves to us. It leaves us in an alienated state of being, if you like. And one manner in which to see this rather conspicuously is to look at the question of healthcare, where the task of treating people in conditions of disease and distress is subjugated to a logic of revenue production or profit creation that translates into sometimes really perverse decisions on the parts of certain institutions that will favor the management and perpetuation of a condition and thus turning it into a kind of zombie golden goose as opposed to its actual treatment and cure in a substantive and final fashion. Now, in the course of those remarks, I indicated that there were several points of connection between Gorz's argumentation and the work of David Harvey, the Marxist geographer. And to bring into the foreground one of those points of connection, I'm just going to have some remarks today about his most recent work, Marx, Capital, and the Madness of Economic Reason. And when I first picked the book up, I actually expected that he was going to draw on André Gorz, especially because he had mentioned Gorz in his previous work, I believe entitled The 17 Contradictions of Capital and the End of Capitalism. But in fact, the notion of the madness of economic reason, which is sort of the focus of Harvey's most recent book, is taking its inspiration from a somewhat different quarter, namely Jacques Derrida, and Jacques Derrida's criticism of an individual by the name of Claude Levi-Strauss is very important for anthropology. I'm not deeply familiar with Claude Levi-Strauss, or for that matter, Derrida, but to summarize how Harvey invokes Derrida, what is remarked by the latter is the curiosity that when certain societies and certain ceremonies, such as the potlatch ceremony, are viewed from an outside observer who is committed to a highly rationalized paradigm, rationalized here in the sense of the emphasis upon the quantitative that we were mentioning with Gorz. A whole family of gestures becomes inscrutable. So the notion of gift or generosity can only be seen as fundamentally irrational because it defies the sort of algebraic ontology which is intertwined with a dogmatic rationalism in the sense that we have indicated elsewhere, because obviously the word rational has a breadth to it that will invite a certain ambiguity. This relates to the tension between the quantitative and the qualitative, but it's a slightly different direction that is maybe otherwise put in terms of, say, the relationship between sign and signified, or the signifier signified, with language. So you have a word, and that word indicates something, right? There are the keys, and then there are the keys. And obviously there's a distance between the name and the representation. Within the ambit of the economic, the key word is money, right? What is money? What does money represent? It represents, it is an index of what we call socially necessary labor time, the effort, energy, and resource which is expended to produce a particular commodity and reproduce that commodity. And under a capitalist framework, produce and reproduce that commodity on a continually expanding scale. And that is actually relatively straightforward. However, because of the way it operates under capitalism, money acquires a second order function because it can have a commodity use in and of itself, namely to facilitate their production and reproduction and so on and so forth. And as such, becomes or acquires its own price. That price is interest. There's a kind of recursiveness which goes on there. So to tie that tension back to the relationship between the signified and the signifier, when money acquires a price, when money is suddenly available for interest, its status as a signifier of socially necessary labor time is actually compromised because the figure of interest is not connected to the determination of socially necessary labor time in material, concrete, particular, specific terms. It represents a kind of fiction, an anticipation of what can be potentially derived from commodity production in the future rather than the present. And the consequences of this distortion are legion, right? On the one hand, of course, it allows for capital to compensate for problems that arise around time. Some enterprises require an enormous amount of upfront capital. This is most obvious in the case of large infrastructure projects like railways, highway systems, and so forth, but will not themselves be able to generate, at least in the near term, a kind of profit commensurate with that outlay. So the money expended to create these sorts of enterprises, which actually have a functionality which is integral not just to themselves, but to the broader set of apparatuses involved in the overall system of industrial production and commerce. In order to prevent the money which is involved in that production from just lying fallow, it is animated by the institution of credit within which interest operates, so as to actually allow the engine of production to continue. Of course, the other side of that is the creation of massive debt. That is the sort of stick attached to the carrot of potential profit. The overall relief is decidedly one marked by tumult, chaos, and, in fact, crisis. Crisis not just as a potential accident, but as something whose realization on a recurrent, on a cyclical basis is necessary to shore up and enable the stability of capitalism overall. And so you see the fundamental madness which attends economic reason. It can be tied to different points of origin, not independently, but concomitantly. You can look at it in terms of the tension between the myopic focus on the quantitative and the expansive as opposed to the qualitative and what is subjectively necessary, or you can look at it in terms of how it compels us to deal with the world, with our relationships with other people, in a language of representation that itself is, if not fundamentally dishonest, at least incredibly distortionary. And in either case, what from what I come away from the analysis is seeing is that it's really incumbent upon us to break out of the fetishes, the idolizations, the abstractions, which have so effectively mesmerized us at this junction in human history. I think that there is significant room for optimism. Increasingly, people are aware of this problematic, but the awareness is not is if you like a necessary but not sufficient condition. We have to move beyond a mere cognizance to actual concrete actions, actual shift in how we relate with each other and with the world, to disentangle ourselves from the errant trajectories upon which these sorts of madnesses have sent us. I already talked a little bit about healthcare, but another arena in which it's increasingly necessary for us to do this work is with reference to the environment, with the ecosphere, if you like, where our relationship with the metabolic processes of nature needs to shift so that we are no longer enthralled by the really cancerous lure of unending growth. And so I'll just leave it there by way of a brief sort of summary of some of the main lines in David Harvey's most recent work, Marx, Capital, and the Madness of Economic Reason. Hopefully sufficient to whet your appetite to go and check out that book, or of course André Gorz's work as well. I think where I'm going next is I'm going to try and go back to Husserl and phenomenology and the effort to reground our sense of the world in terms of our actual experience, our lived experience or encounter with life. So that's all for now. I hope you guys find this useful. And of course, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye for now.